Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning! Welcome to another edition of Know Your Unit 1 Vision, aka Know Your Fried Chicken. So today, we talk about somebody that's a healer, but, well, you know the meme. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into it here. So this is going to be the Priest, slash Sybil. Now, this is going to be available to 3 units, so it's kind of semi-unique. This is going to be available to Kashua, as well as Oelius from the neutral route, and Denim, in case you happen to prefer to use him as well. Now, I will say there's probably a lot of classes that can do something similar in Denim's case, but either way, this is a fun little class all the same, given that it's somebody that is a bit of a anti-undead specialist, a bit of an offensive priest of sorts, does have all of the usual priest tools and what have you, but again, it isn't quite as offensive as something like the Princess. It isn't quite as debuff orientated as something like the Dark Priest. It's somewhere in the middle. It's got its own little niche, almost entirely against undead stuff. So this is primarily Oelius's class for all intents and purposes. The other two just happen to have access to it. So let's go ahead and get into this here. So looking at their stats right from the get-go, they're definitely doing all right as far as their offensive stats are concerned. Being solid in terms of intelligence and mind, decent bit of resistance, good bit of agility for hitting stuff, and obviously at the very maximum there, we've got avoidance, because you know the Casual loves to avoid her problems. Anyway, we've got vitality and dexterity that are only slightly behind, strength that's a little bit under that, and, you know, resistance that's doing okay. Definitely leaning towards the attack side of things, because the Priest is, again, a more offensive variant, just offensively flavored variant of the healer in many ways. So, let's go ahead and look over the unit themselves. I will have Denim filling the role in this particular case because, you know, it was running Dark Priest for Kashua and whatnot. And this is one that's primarily going to be kind of discussed on the stat sheet, so to speak, because frankly, like, there's not really too much to say as far as when they actually get out into the field, with one exception, which is one of their unique abilities. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So, we've got Divine, we've got Draconic. As far as Draconics go, don't worry, they're not launching lasers anytime soon. For Draconics, we've got Renewal, Protection, Spellguard, Acrobatics, Ballistics, Warcraft, Thaumaturgy, Holy Shield, and Martyrdom. Just kind of all going for the support-orientated side of things. And then Divine-wise, we've got Missile Spells, Overheads, Summons, Star Ion, as well as Heals 1 and 2, All Heal 1 and 2, and then all of the kind of Divine support abilities going down up till Ease. So they get almost everything in that particular regard. Unlike the standard clerics, though, slash monks, they actually don't have access to any kind of multiplication skills for their heals, so they are primarily looking to do offense and serve anti-undead duty. We'll get to that in just a bit of a second. Their weapon list is a bit unusual, though. We've got fists for obvious defensive reasons, hammers if you want to go a bit more exorcist with it, cudgels if you want to go full offensive spellcaster, spellbooks if you can't really decide, and then fusils. They are a healer with a gun. Yes, a lot of people demanded that meme be turned into a class, and here we go. Anyway, that being said, we have augments for everything if you would prefer to go that way, racials for everything except for anatomy, as you'd kind of expect, parry but no deflect, so they will still remain being weak against ranged attacks and what have you. Clarity and efficacy up at maximum. Jump, Wade, Sanctuary. Not many things run Sanctuary, and in her place, I would kind of argue that it's possibly even detrimental, because you kind of want undead units to get close to the Priest. And I know I keep saying her, because I'm used to saying, like, Priest is just Kashua, even though it is technically 3 different people, even if it is 2/3 lady types this time around. Anyways, whatever. So Field Alchemy 1, so they're not as item-orientated as a standard healer. We've got Tack 1 and 2, though, and this is when we get into the unique abilities. So, first of all, we've got Fell Seal. Yes, that's why we've got the music in the background. And this is going to be similar to Seal Undead from Final Fantasy Tactics. However, you don't need to use a gun with it. And additionally, this is going to be very good at just basically damaging and kind of sealing off an undead unit. This doesn't come up all the times, but I personally found it pretty handy going through the temples, like those situations when you needed a healer, but you didn't need an insane amount of healing, or you kind of had that role already fulfilled to some degree, but you did need somebody to, let's say, kind of serve alongside White Knights or what have you, which is, again, kind of fitting for the Priest in this case. Essentially serving that role of being able to shut down kind of undead units for the time being so that somebody else can really go in for the kill. I found it really useful, again, in her case, that she did some damage with it. It petrified them. You get a Coronal Mace on that thing, followed up with a Fervor, and it's a nice little kind of a tag team between those two. So it's pretty useful there. Then Last Rites is basically the old Holy Water, just made a bit cheaper, where it's going to destroy stilled undead units. So you kind of have exorcisms on both ends of your turn, as the priest always did. In Still Light, if you're going for a bit more damage there, and this also means that you can actually have a Divine Pistol user, which is going to be unique outside of the Lord, I believe. Anyways, we've got Wards, Absorb MP, which Absorb MP plus MP Claws does mean that they're a potentially very good suppression unit against stuff like Ghost Wizards and whatnot. Kind of oddly specific, but they are going to be a more frontline orientated priest. They do get slightly better kind of equipment availability and whatnot. Anyways, we've got our wards and whatnot, and then lastly we have Turn Undead. So this is going to be one of the rare cases where we see a full map a kind of a sweeping move that's based off of vision. So anybody that is within line of sight gets frightened as far as undead units go. It's very oddly specific. Like, honestly, for the amount of TP that it takes, I don't think... Even in undead heavy maps, like, for example, the Earth Temple and whatnot, there were very few cases I actually found this useful. So, personally, like, if we're comparing this next to, let's say, just charging up a, like, Grim Dawn from the Dark Priest or whatnot, since it doesn't technically count as dark, so it does still hit on dead stuff, I personally found that a lot more reliable. But if you're not spending Kashua for a class like this, if you are using Aurelius or someone, it is, I would say, like, on Aurelius, this is a really good deal. For Kashua, I would say her other two classes kind of have, you know, potentially better options in that particular regard. But this is a cool, unique move that's going to potentially scare a lot of units. So as far as I recall, I don't believe it's actually guaranteed, though, that it is still going to be a chance. So just kind of throwing that out there. Anyways, that being said, the main downside of this is that even if they are an undead priest, even if they are somebody that is doing that job relatively well, we do still have the weird little caveat that they're still not exactly always going to be directly in front of everything. Well, they are going to be in front, but I mean, like, they're not necessarily breaking through lines that much. I don't believe they have access to Opportunist. Let me check that real quick. Because if they do, that actually is a thing I overlooked for sure, but... here, let's see. Do we have Opportunist? Actually, let's go to the Learn menu. We can check that a little bit better. Because if we have, yeah, I don't... Is there Opportunist? Yeah, okay, so something like Opportunist could be pretty darn useful on them, actually. Because if they can get behind those lines and potentially get line of sight on all those various undead units, then something like Turn Undead can be pretty good. And because they have access to sort of healer class armor, as it were, so like medium and light armor in general, that would give them a bit more play in terms of being able to fully shut down a lot of those kind of things in front of them. But again, there's some asterisks to that, you know? So yeah, I would say Turn Undead is a cool move for places like Palace of the Dead. Sometimes. Some maps on Palace of the Dead, because there's a lot of things that will block line of sight. Or places like the Earth Temple, which are way more open and have a ton of undead stuff in them. It is very... kind of oddly specific as far as when and how you might want to potentially use those various tools or whatnot, but it could be a way to quickly sweep up certain maps. So we're just going to kind of show off the potential of this move right now, as well as a few other things, just to kind of like test stuff around, show a few tools here and there. But again, one of the features that this class has that we haven't talked about very much is that it is a priest with a gun, which doesn't, like, it does sound like it would be strictly for the memes, but there is additionally another aspect to consider of the whole thing, in that it's essentially a long-range guaranteed silence. So whereas a regular... let's say a regular healer might potentially have to rely on something like mute to go to silence something. In their case, they would just be able to say, hey, guess what? No, silenced. That's the end of that. So either way, just kind of something to consider there. Also, I think I just did this without actually turning on the moves, so just a moment. So yeah, the Silverado finisher that I'm thinking of, that's actually on the Buccaneer at this point, not the Priest. So as far as the Priest is concerned, like that whole Turn Undead thing, if it was, let's say, an action move, and then you could follow it up with like a divine-orientated shot with your pistol, which you can do through Instill Light. I don't remember if that specifically increases your damage versus Undead in that particular interaction. Still, though, it's kind of a maybe. As far as Fail Seal goes, it depends. I forget exactly what stats it rolls against, but this is a pretty decent chance of success. So, for example, if we were to go over here, we could, let's say, go ahead and Fail Seal this guy. and suddenly he's just turned to stone. The odds of success on this one are decent enough to make it worthwhile, and additionally with some of the reworks, as far as kind of shielding from petrification and stuff like that, you could probably still get a pretty decent punch if you had like a Sun Spear 3 loaded up or something like that, to then, follow up if you didn't feel like you were going to hit in the first place. So like if their evasion was dodging your shot, you run up, you petrify, you hit them with that kind of thing. It could potentially be worthwhile there. So between their three unique moves, I feel like Fell Seal is really good. Last Rites is pretty alright, due to being able to exercise in two different directions, make use of both your bars at the same time. Turn Undead is kind of just, I feel like in order to be worth it, it would either have to cost like half as much, or potentially be 100% or something. It's just, as it stands right now, like Fear compared with something like let's say just breaching or just completely shutting down something or whatever else. I know in most situations I would much rather go forward, use something like like Fell Seal or what have you, and then just follow up with something else more so than using Turn Undead. So when I was using the class, again, I personally, I just didn't really care for Turn Undead very much. Maybe your situation will be a bit different. I just think it's a bit much. Like it just feels like it's a bit much for what it does. Because Fear is good, but then you've got stuff like the Terenius coming in. It's like, what's their version of Fear at this point? It's like they guarantee an attack. They hit something with Fear. They get their Lament with both Slow and Curse on there. Like they're just dominating something when they get close. Which, speaking of, I probably need to redo Terenius at some point. But yeah, when we're talking about the priest, that's just like, it's gonna spook the undead for a little bit. Like, it's got infinite range basically, but it just, the one use. Okay, let me go ahead and throw one more thing out there. It's not that it doesn't have a use case. It does have a very specific use case, in that its whole thing is like you terrify undead at really long range. They get close. You hit them with light spells, which further scale up versus undead stuff. So they more or less line up a target for a future follow-up. But again, it just kind of goes back to the same thing of, I wish this was an action move or something, because it just doesn't feel worth using your primary action on. Like, I would prefer to just hit something twice, if at all possible. Like, if you're completely drained of MP, and you needed to do something that turn, and there were undead lined up in front of you that are specifically not blocked by line of sight, because you specifically took your healer, put them in front of everybody else, and made it work that way, sure. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe people in the comments will have some other use case for Turn Undead, but to me, it feels like it's there as a setup for a follow-up Divine Barrage of some variety. So, like, hey, if you have your Valk with Wisp or something, maybe, loaded up and ready to go, that could potentially work, because if it is frightening multiple units and they all happen to be within that bubble of Turn Undead, then yeah, that could potentially sweep if you're lucky. So there's like 3 different layers of if you're lucky and in the right place at the same time. It could be really useful there, Anyway, that's enough dunking on that one skill that's just kind of a random thing that was thrown on there, I think. So that's the priest in a nutshell. It is the healer with a gun. They don't necessarily scale up their healing, but they do have a lot of offensive potential, and they're a fun little goober to play around with. I think it's great on Aurelius, just kind of meh as far as the other two, personally, anyway. So that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one, and take care. Bye. Also, like, cue 5 seconds from now when this class gets randomly updated 50 bajillion different ways. Anyway, later. Bye.